The December rain hammered against the glass towers of London's financial district, each drop racing down the pristine windows of Sterling Industries like tears on a giant's face. Marcus Whitfield stood in the marble lobby, his reflection caught between the polished floor and the cathedral-high ceiling, adjusting his perfectly knotted tie for the third time that morning. 23 years he'd worked in this building, climbing from mailroom clerk to facilities manager, and he wore his position like armor against the world that had once looked down on him. "Morning, Mr. Whitfield," Sarah, the young receptionist, offered cheerfully as she arranged fresh white orchids at her desk. Marcus merely nodded, his eyes already scanning the lobby for imperfections, a smudge on the brass railings, a wilted leaf on the indoor ficus. These details mattered. They were the difference between excellence and mediocrity, between respect and invisibility. The automatic doors hissed open, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the smell of wet concrete. Marcus turned, expecting to see one of the early arriving executives, but instead found himself looking at a man who seemed to have wandered in from another world entirely. Water dripped from his thin jacket onto the Italian marble, creating small puddles that caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above. His shoes, worn through at the toes, squelched with each careful step. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness, refined despite his appearance. "I wonder if I might wait inside for a moment, just until the rain passes." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, the desperate attempting to use their building as a shelter, leaving their poverty lingering in the air like a contagion. His fingers found the security alert button on his phone, though he didn't press it yet. "This is a private building," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Not a public shelter. There's a cafe 3 blocks down." The stranger's eyes, startlingly blue despite the exhaustion written across his weathered face, held Marcus's gaze without challenge or anger. "I understand," he said simply. "I wouldn't ask, but I have an important appointment nearby, and I've walked quite far already." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I can wait by the door, out of the way." "No." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between the man and the lobby's warmth. "You're dripping water everywhere. You're disturbing our employees." His voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of early arrivals heading for the lifts. "Security," he called out, though his eyes never left the stranger's face. "Please escort this gentleman out." 2 guards appeared with practiced efficiency. The stranger raised his hands slightly, a gesture of peace. "There's no need," he said quietly. "I'll go." As he turned to leave, he looked back at Marcus one last time. "I hope you never find yourself standing where I'm standing now." Marcus watched through the glass doors as the man disappeared into the grey morning, his silhouette quickly swallowed by the rain. A strange unease settled in his chest, but he pushed it away. He had a building to run, standards to maintain. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with the morning's first crisis, a leaked pipe in the 3rd-floor conference room. He turned away from the door, already calculating repair times and costs, unaware that the man he'd just turned away was walking the 3 blocks to the cafe, where he would wait 2 hours before returning for a meeting that would change everything. Sarah watched Marcus stride toward the lifts, then glanced back at the doors where the stranger had stood. She'd recognized something in the man's eyes, a dignity that transcended his circumstances. But she said nothing, returning to her orchids while the rain continued its relentless assault on the city. Marcus's office on the 14th floor was a monument to order. Every pen had its place, every file labeled and color-coded, every surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He sat behind his desk, fingers dancing across his keyboard as he coordinated the pipe repair, but his mind kept drifting to the stranger's eyes. Those blue eyes that had looked at him not with anger, but with something far worse, understanding. He pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. Below, the city churned with its morning ritual, thousands of umbrellas blooming like black flowers in the rain. Somewhere down there, that man was probably still walking, still wet, still cold. Marcus's reflection stared back at him from the rain-streaked glass, and for a moment he saw someone else, a younger version of himself, standing outside a different building, in cheaper clothes, with hungrier eyes. "Mr. Whitfield?" Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom. "The CEO's office just called. Ms. Bennett wants to see you at 11. They said it's urgent." Marcus's stomach dropped. Victoria Bennett rarely summoned anyone directly. In his 5 years as facilities manager, he'd spoken to her perhaps 3 times, always in passing, always brief. "Did they say what it's about?" "No, sir. Just that you should bring the morning's incident reports." Incident reports. His mind raced through the possibilities. The pipe leak was minor, already being handled, unless... Had someone complained about this morning? Had one of the executives seen him with the stranger? He straightened his tie again, a nervous habit he'd developed in his first year, when he still felt like an imposter in his pressed shirts and polished shoes. The memory came unbidden. His mother's hands, reddened from years of cleaning other people's homes, straightening his school tie. "You show them you belong, Marcus," she'd said. "You show them you're just as good." But belonging, he'd learned, was a fortress you had to defend every single day. He returned to his desk and pulled up the security footage from that morning. There was the stranger, pausing just inside the doors, water pooling at his feet. Marcus watched himself approach, saw his own body language shift from professional to defensive to aggressive. The stranger never raised his voice, never gestured dramatically. He simply stood there, dignified in his poverty, until Marcus had him removed. The timestamp showed 7:47 a.m. The entire interaction had lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes that now felt like they might define his career. He closed the video and opened a new file, beginning to type up an incident report that would justify his actions. Unauthorized individual attempted to loiter in company lobby. Potential security risk. Removed according to protocol. But even as he typed, the words felt hollow. The man hadn't been a security risk. He'd been wet and cold and tired, and Marcus had seen in him every fear he carried about sliding backward, about being revealed as the working-class kid who didn't really belong in this gleaming tower. His phone buzzed, an email from Victoria Bennett's personal assistant. "Please come up now. The CEO's schedule has changed." Marcus saved his report, printed it, and stood. His legs felt unsteady as he walked to the executive lift, his special keycard granting him access to the top floor. As the lift rose, he caught his reflection in the polished doors and practiced his professional smile, the one that hid the boy from Elephant and Castle who had learned to speak differently, dress differently, be different in order to survive in this world. The lift opened into a realm of hushed voices and original artwork where the air itself seemed more refined. Ms. Bennett's assistant, a severe woman named Patricia, looked up from her desk. "She's waiting for you," she said, something strange in her expression. "Go right in." Marcus knocked once and entered, his incident report clutched in his hand like a shield. But as the door opened, the carefully constructed defense he'd prepared crumbled entirely. Because there, sitting across from Victoria Bennett, wearing a borrowed suit but the same tired eyes, was the stranger from that morning. The silence in Victoria Bennett's office stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The stranger, no, not a stranger anymore, sat in one of the leather chairs facing Victoria's desk, his wet clothes replaced by a navy suit that looked expensive despite fitting him poorly, as if borrowed hastily from someone else. "Come in, Marcus," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular blend of authority and warmth that had built Sterling Industries from a startup to a FTSE 250 company. "Close the door, please." Marcus's legs moved mechanically. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that made his chest tighten. He remained standing, unsure whether to acknowledge the man or pretend this morning hadn't happened. The incident report in his hand felt like evidence of a crime. "I believe you've already met my brother," Victoria said, and the words hung in the air like suspended gravity. "Thomas, this is Marcus Whitfield, our facilities manager." "Marcus, my younger brother, Thomas Bennett." The room tilted. Marcus gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. Brother, the CEO's brother. The man he'd thrown out into the rain was... He swallowed hard, tasting copper and regret. Thomas stood and extended his hand. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying no trace of accusation. The same gentle tone from this morning, the same steady gaze. Marcus took the offered hand numbly, noting the calluses, the sun-damaged skin that spoke of a life lived far from London's climate. I didn't," Marcus began, but Victoria raised a hand. "Sit down, Marcus. Both of you." She moved to the window, her silhouette sharp against the grey sky. "Thomas arrived from South Sudan yesterday. He's been running educational programs there for the past 8 years. He came back because... She paused, her composure cracking slightly. "Because he heard about my surgery." "You weren't supposed to know about that," Thomas said softly to his sister. "Nothing stays secret in the aid community," Victoria replied, still facing the window. "Just like nothing stays secret in this building." She turned then, fixing Marcus with a look that wasn't quite anger, but something more complex. "Patricia showed me the security footage from this morning. She thought I should know immediately, given that Thomas had an appointment with me at 10. Marcus's throat constricted. "Miss Bennett, I had no idea. If I had known..." "That's exactly the point," Thomas interrupted gently. "You didn't know. You saw what you expected to see, a poor man in a rich man's building." He leaned forward, his borrowed suit bunching at the shoulders. "Tell me, Mr. Whitfield, what did you see when you looked at me?" The question cut deeper than any accusation could have. Marcus felt his carefully maintained professional mask beginning to crack. "I saw..." He stopped, started again. "I saw someone who didn't belong." "Why?" Thomas pressed, still gentle, still devastating in his quietness. Marcus's hands clenched in his lap. The truth clawed at his throat, demanding release. 23 years of carefully hidden shame suddenly felt unbearably heavy. "Because I've spent my entire adult life making sure no one looks at me that way," he said, the words falling like stones. "Because I grew up in a council flat in Elephant and Castle, and my mother cleaned offices like this one, and I swore I'd never be the person standing in the rain." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Victoria moved from the window, her expression shifting to something Marcus hadn't expected: recognition. "My father was a janitor," she said quietly. "Before he started his first business, he cleaned offices at night and drove a minicab during the day. Thomas and I grew up above a corner shop in Whitechapel." She looked at her brother with a mixture of love and old pain. "We had different ideas about what to do with that beginning. I built this." She gestured to the office, the building, the empire beyond. "Thomas chose to give it away. I chose to remember it," Thomas corrected gently. "There's a difference." Marcus looked between the siblings, seeing now the family resemblance despite their different paths, the same determined jawline, the same intelligent eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but necessary. "I'm so deeply sorry." "I don't want your apology," Thomas said. "I want to understand. You've built walls, Mr. Whitfield. Strong ones, but walls that keep others out, also keep you in." The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, casting Victoria's office in a pearl grey light that made everything feel suspended between dream and reality. Marcus sat with his hands flat on his knees, feeling like a defendant awaiting verdict. But the verdict, he realized, wasn't theirs to give. It was his own. "Tell me about your mother," Thomas said unexpectedly. "The one who cleaned offices." Marcus looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because I think she matters to this story," Thomas replied. "To your story." Victoria poured tea from a service that had appeared silently, delivered by Patricia, who'd withdrawn just as quietly. The normal rhythms of executive life continuing while Marcus's world reconstructed itself. "Her name was Dorothy," Marcus heard himself say. "She worked nights so she could be home when I got back from school. She'd arrive at buildings like this at 10 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m. Her hands always smelled of industrial disinfectant." He accepted a cup of tea, noting how his fingers trembled slightly. "She died 5 years ago, 3 months after I got this position." "Did she ever see your office?" Victoria asked. "Once," Marcus's voice caught. "I brought her in on a Sunday, showed her everything. My name on the door, the view from the window. She cried." He set down his cup, unable to drink past the tightness in his throat. "She said she was proud. But then she asked me something I'll never forget. 'Do you still see the people who clean it?'" Thomas leaned back in his chair, a small, sad smile crossing his weathered face. "And do you?" "I thought I did," Marcus admitted. "I know all their names. I ensure they have proper break rooms, fair schedules, decent wages within the budget. But seeing them and seeing them," he struggled for words, "those are different things, aren't they?" "Our parents died in a car accident when I was 19 and Victoria was 24, Thomas said, changing direction but somehow maintaining the thread. "Left us with nothing but debt and each other. Victoria had just started her MBA. I was studying philosophy." He glanced at his sister with old affection. "She dropped out to work to make sure I could finish university. Sacrificed everything. And then you threw it all away," Victoria said, but her tone was gentle, worn smooth by years of repetition. "I went where I was needed," Thomas corrected. "But we're not here to relitigate old arguments." He turned back to Marcus. "I've spent the last decade in places where poverty isn't hidden, where it doesn't shame itself into silence. Do you know what I've learned? That dignity isn't about what you have. It's about how you see yourself and how you allow yourself to see others." Marcus felt something shifting in his chest, tectonic plates of identity grinding against each other. "This morning when I saw you, I saw my worst fear. The thing I've been running from my entire life. The possibility that despite everything, I could end up back where I started." "But you haven't moved at all," Thomas said, not unkindly. "You're still that boy from Elephant and Castle, just wearing expensive armor. And that armor has become a prison." Victoria set down her cup with a decisive click. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone except Thomas and my surgeon. The heart surgery wasn't just routine. I had a massive heart attack, 48 years old, and I nearly died at my desk, surrounded by all of this." She gestured at the office, the success, the empire. "While I was in recovery, all I could think about was how I'd built walls so high that my own brother hadn't felt he could call me for 8 years. 10, Thomas corrected softly. 10, Victoria accepted, because I was ashamed that he'd chosen poverty when I'd worked so hard to escape it. Because every time I looked at him, I saw where we came from instead of who he'd chosen to become." The parallel wasn't lost on Marcus. He saw it clearly now. How he'd become Victoria, how the stranger at the door had been Thomas, how fear of the past had poisoned the present. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "That's the wrong question," Thomas said. "The question is, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be when no one's watching, when there's no professional protocol to follow?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street where he'd sent Thomas away. The rain had brought out the umbrellas, but also the humanity, people sharing cover, holding doors, creating small kindnesses in the midst of their morning rush. "I want to apologize properly," he said. "Not just to you, Thomas, but to everyone I've stepped over while climbing up, to everyone I've made invisible, because seeing them reminded me of where I came from." The afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, sending shafts of light across the conference room where Marcus had assembled his team. Maintenance supervisors, security heads, cleaning staff managers, people he'd worked with for years but kept at professional arm's length. They sat uncertainly, unsure why the afternoon meeting had been called with such urgency. Sarah from reception was there too, having been specifically invited by Marcus. She fidgeted with her notebook, stealing glances at him. He looked different somehow, as if something fundamental had shifted in the hours since morning. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus began, standing rather than taking his usual seat at the head of the table. "I need to share something with you. About this morning, about myself, and about how we operate in this building." He told them about Thomas, about the rejection at the door, about the revelation in Victoria's office. But more than that, he told them about Dorothy, about the council flat, about the boy who'd learned to hide his origins so well that he'd lost himself in the process. Every day, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability of the moment, we make decisions about who belongs and who doesn't, who deserves warmth and who should stay in the rain. I've been making those decisions based on fear, not on principle, and I've been teaching you all to do the same. Margaret, who managed the night cleaning crew, raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Whitfield, are you saying we should let anyone into the building? No, Marcus replied. Security matters, but humanity matters more. There's a difference between maintaining safety and maintaining hierarchies, between protecting the building and protecting our prejudices. He pulled up a presentation he'd hastily prepared in the past 2 hours. I'm proposing changes, real ones, a heated waiting area near the entrance for anyone seeking shelter during extreme weather, a partnership with local shelters to provide resources, a review of our interaction protocols that prioritizes dignity alongside security. The board will never approve that, said James from security, though his tone suggested interest rather than opposition. The CEO already has, Marcus replied, remembering Victoria's words as he'd left her office. Make it right, Marcus, not just with Thomas, but with who we are as a company. Sarah raised her hand. I recognized him, she said quietly. Your visitor this morning. Not him specifically, but what he represented. My dad lost his job 2 years ago. He was too proud to tell anyone, would leave the house in his suit every morning and sit in the library all day. One day it was closed and he had nowhere to go. A security guard at an office building let him sit in their lobby just for a few hours. That small kindness meant everything. The room fell silent, the weight of Sarah's words settling over them. Marcus saw others nodding, saw recognition in their eyes. How many of them had their own stories, their own close calls with hardship? We're not just managing facilities, Marcus continued. We're creating the first impression of this company. What does it say about us if that impression is that we value Polish over people? The discussion that followed was unlike any meeting Marcus had ever led. People shared stories, challenged assumptions, proposed ideas. The careful professional distances he'd maintained began to dissolve, replaced by something more genuine, more human. Thomas appeared in the doorway near the meeting's end, still in his borrowed suit, but looking more comfortable in it now. May I? He asked. Marcus gestured him in. Everyone, this is Thomas Bennett, the CEO's brother and the man I failed this morning. Thomas shook his head. You didn't fail me, Mr. Whitfield. You showed me something important, how easy it is for any of us to lose sight of each other. He addressed the room. I've spent years in refugee camps, in places where everything has been stripped away except human dignity. And I can tell you that dignity isn't something you earn or achieve, it's something you recognize in others, or you don't. What made you come back? Sarah asked. After so many years away? Thomas smiled, that sad, gentle expression Marcus was beginning to understand. Love, he said simply. My sister and I let pride and different choices divide us, but when I heard she might die, none of that mattered anymore. Just like this morning didn't matter once Mr. Whitfield and I actually saw each other. As the meeting concluded and people filed out, many stopped to shake Thomas's hand, to share their own stories with Marcus. Walls were coming down, not just his, but throughout the carefully structured hierarchy of the building. Margaret lingered, the last to leave. My son works in the city now, she said to Marcus. Investment banking. He doesn't tell his colleagues what I do. I understand why, but it hurts. She paused at the door. Maybe after today, things can be different. 3 weeks had passed since the morning that changed everything. The executive boardroom of Sterling Industries hummed with tension as members filed in for the emergency meeting. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, his proposal packet pristine before him, though his palms were slick with nervous sweat. The changes he'd implemented had not gone unnoticed. The new weather shelter had already caused what board member Richard Hartwell called an eyesore situation. The partnership with local charities had raised what Penelope Morse termed liability concerns, and the revised security protocols had generated what several members simply called problems. Victoria entered last, Thomas beside her. He'd extended his stay, working with Marcus on what they'd begun calling the Dignity Initiative. His presence had become familiar in the building, though he still wore borrowed suits that never quite fit right, a deliberate choice Marcus had come to understand. "Let's begin," Victoria said, her tone giving nothing away. "Richard, I believe you called this meeting?" Richard Hartwell, 71 years old and on the board since Sterling's inception, cleared his throat. "Indeed. We need to discuss the recent alterations to our building management. Marcus, while your intentions may be admirable, we have an image to maintain. Our clients expect a certain level of—" He searched for the word. "Exclusivity. You mean they expect not to see poor people?" Thomas said quietly from his seat. Richard's face reddened. "That's an oversimplification. We're running a business, not a charity." "Actually," Marcus said, opening his folder, "we're running both better since the changes." He passed around sheets of data he'd compiled. Employee satisfaction is up 18%. Sick days are down 12%. And surprisingly, 3 major clients have specifically mentioned the weather shelter in positive feedback, saying it demonstrates Sterling's commitment to social responsibility. "That's a short-term bump," Penelope interjected. "What happens when word spreads? When we become known as a soft touch? Property values will remain unaffected," Victoria interrupted. "I've had our analysts run the numbers. Similar initiatives in New York and Tokyo have shown no negative impact on commercial property values. In fact, buildings with strong community engagement policies show better long-term tenant retention." The debate raged for an hour. Old guard versus new thinking, fear versus possibility. Marcus watched it all, remembering his mother's words. "Change doesn't come from comfort, love. It comes from someone being brave enough to be uncomfortable." Finally, Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. Marcus, you're facilities manager, not some social revolutionary. You're here because you maintain standards, not destroy them. Or have you forgotten where you came from?" The room went silent. The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a weapon aimed directly at Marcus's carefully constructed professional identity. Marcus stood slowly. "No, Richard, I haven't forgotten. I'm from Elephant and Castle. My mother cleaned buildings like this one. I spent years trying to hide that, to become someone you'd find acceptable. But hiding made me cruel. It made me someone who could look at a cold, tired human being and see only a threat to the shine on our marble floors." He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "You want to know what's really damaging our image? It's not the weather shelter. It's the video that went viral last month of one of our security guards roughly removing an elderly man who'd collapsed near our entrance. It's the 3 discrimination lawsuits we've quietly settled because our standards included unofficial policies about who looks like they belong. It's the fact that we employ 300 people in this building, and half of them feel they have to hide who they really are to fit in." Thomas stood as well. "May I share something? In South Sudan, I work with former child soldiers. Children who've done terrible things, seen terrible things. The hardest part isn't teaching them to read or write. It's teaching them they deserve to learn, that they're worthy of investment. Every time we turn someone away because they don't look right, dress right, speak right, we're telling that story again, that worth is conditional, that dignity is earned." "This is all very touching," Richard said sarcastically. But nothing," Victoria said, steel in her voice. "I died for 3 minutes on the operating table. 3 minutes. Do you know what I thought about when I came back? Not stock prices or quarterly reports. I thought about my brother, who I hadn't spoken to in a decade because I was ashamed he'd chosen purpose over profit. I thought about every person I'd stepped over to get to this chair." She stood, commanding the room. "Sterling Industries is changing. Not because it's good PR, but because it's right. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to tender their resignation. The silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, Penelope laughed. "My grandson," she said, "he's been after me about this for years. Says my generation built walls where we should have built bridges. Maybe he's right." One by one, the tide turned. Not everyone was convinced, but enough were willing to try. As the meeting concluded, Richard remained seated, looking older than his years. "You're making a mistake," he told Marcus quietly. "The world doesn't work on kindness." "Maybe not," Marcus replied, "but it doesn't work without it either." 6 months later, the lobby of Sterling Industries looked exactly the same and completely different. The marble still gleamed, the orchids still stood pristine at reception, but something fundamental had shifted in the very air of the place. Marcus stood near the entrance, not checking for imperfections, but greeting the morning shift. He knew their names now, not just professionally, but personally. Janet's daughter had just started university. Kofi was training for a marathon. Small connections that had transformed the building from a monument to success into something more human. The weather shelter, tastefully designed to blend with the building's architecture, had become a gathering point for more than just those seeking refuge from rain. Business people grabbed coffee there, deals were discussed, and occasionally worlds collided in unexpected ways. Last week, a venture capitalist had met a homeless entrepreneur there and decided to fund his startup idea. "You're looking pleased with yourself," Victoria said, appearing beside him. She looked healthier than she had in years, the stress lines that had seemed permanent finally softening. "Thomas would say that's dangerous," Marcus replied, smiling. "Thomas would be right." She paused, watching the morning flow of people. "He's leaving tomorrow." Marcus nodded. He'd known this was coming. Thomas had extended his stay far longer than planned, but his work in South Sudan couldn't wait forever. "He changed everything," Marcus said simply. "No," Victoria corrected. "He revealed everything. The capacity was always there, in you, in me, in this place. We just needed someone to show us we were looking at it wrong." Sarah approached them, no longer the nervous receptionist, but the building's new community liaison, a position created specifically to manage the growing network of social initiatives. "Mr. Whitfield, Mrs. Harrison is here for her interview." Mrs. Harrison was Dorothy's friend from the old neighborhood, now applying for a position in the expanded maintenance team, another small circle completing itself. "Send her to my office," Marcus said, then paused. "Actually, I'll meet her in the weather shelter. Better atmosphere for a conversation." As he walked toward the shelter, he passed the spot where he'd first confronted Thomas. There was no plaque, no marker, but Marcus knew. It was the place where his old self had died and something new had been born. Not a different person, but the same person finally willing to be whole. The interview went well. Mrs. Harrison was qualified, experienced, and more importantly, she brought a perspective the building needed. As they concluded, she grabbed his hand. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, eyes misty. "Not of what you've become, but of who you've allowed yourself to be." That evening, the building hosted a farewell gathering for Thomas. Not in the executive dining room, but in the main lobby, open to everyone. Cleaning staff mingled with executives, security guards chatted with board members. Richard Hartwell had resigned, but Penelope Morse was there, her grandson by her side, both of them deep in conversation with Thomas about sustainable development. Thomas found Marcus by the windows, looking out at the city lights. "You know," Thomas said, "I never thanked you." Marcus turned, surprised. "Thank me? For what? I threw you out into the rain." "You gave me my sister back," Thomas replied. "Your journey, your willingness to change, it showed her that she could too. We've talked more in these 6 months than in the previous decade." "You're coming back?" Marcus asked. "Every year," Thomas promised. "But you don't need me anymore. You've remembered who you are." As the evening wound down, Marcus helped the cleaning crew tidy up, something he'd never done before, but now felt natural. Janet was working the late shift. and they chatted about her daughter's courses while stacking chairs. "Mr. Whitfield," she said suddenly, "can I tell you something? For years, I've cleaned your office, and I always wondered about that photo on your desk, the one of the woman in the cleaning uniform." "My mother," Marcus confirmed. "I know. I could tell by how carefully you dust it yourself, never letting anyone else touch it. I always thought there's a story there. There's a person in that suit who remembers." She smiled. "I'm glad you finally let that person out." Later, alone in his office, Marcus looked at that photo. Dorothy smiled back at him, frozen in time, but somehow more present than ever. He thought about the morning that had started everything, about Thomas standing in the rain, about Victoria facing her mortality, about his own journey from fear to freedom. The building was quiet now, but not empty. Night shift workers moved through the halls, maintaining and cleaning, preparing for tomorrow. Marcus could hear them, see them, acknowledge them in a way he never had before. They were no longer reminders of where he'd come from, but partners in where they were all going. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas, already at the airport. "Remember, walls that keep others out also keep you in. Stay free, my friend." Marcus typed back, "Stay warm. You're always welcome here, rain or shine." He gathered his things, said goodnight to the security guard, Robert, whose son had just made the football team, and stepped out into the London night. The city sprawled before him, full of its hierarchies and divisions, its marble towers and council flats. But now he saw it differently, not as levels to climb, but as a tapestry to be part of, each thread essential to the whole. As he walked toward the tube station, it began to rain. Marcus smiled, remembering another rainy morning, another man seeking shelter. He didn't hurry or seek cover. Instead, he let the rain fall on him, washing away the last residue of the man who had been too afraid to see himself in others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between fear and love, between separation and connection. But tonight, Marcus Whitfield was simply a man walking home in the rain, no longer running from where he'd been, no longer afraid of who he was. The security camera at Sterling Industries captured his figure disappearing into the night, but it couldn't capture the transformation within. That was written in smaller gestures, in the janitor he'd greeted by name, in the shelter that would protect someone tomorrow, in the brother and sister who'd found their way back to each other, in the building that had learned to breathe with compassion instead of merely gleaming with success. Change, Marcus had learned, wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about finally having the courage to be who you always were, just hidden beneath the armor of fear. And sometimes it took a stranger at the door to show you that the only person you were really keeping out was yourself. The rain continued to fall on London, on rich and poor alike, on marble towers and modest flats, washing the city clean for another morning, another chance to choose differently, another opportunity to see the dignity in every face, especially the one in the mirror.